another PDF pattern today. I was looking for fun and cute summery patterns that don't take much fabric. I'm trying to sew up my stash, and I was looking for cute things that maybe only took around a yard. And I also really like some of the vintage looks, and I found this. It is on Etsy. I'll put the link below where you can find this pattern. It's called Subversive Femme Patterns, the Rockabilly Wrap Top, and you can see it's very 50s looking. It's also really simple. I've done another sort of vintage wrap top that was more 60s into the 70s. I'll put a link to that too up in the corner and down in the description box. Both of them didn't take a ton of fabric, were really cute and fun. So we're gonna work on this today. This only comes in a medium. But because of the way it is, it would fit a lot of body types. I'm going to go ahead and sew up the medium just as it is, but I know I have a daughter who would probably like to wear this, and the medium would be just really big on her. She is like a 0. So I'm probably going to at least grade down. I'm going to make the medium up today just as an example. I'll put it over on my dress form over there, and then I may grade it up and make a larger size for me at some point. But let's try this today. I went through my stash and started looking to see what fabrics I have. I pulled out a few over there that are just cottons. I think I am going to line this top bodice part up here. I did that on my other wrap top, and that's because of how this is. It's completely open in the back. It would be very hard to wear a bra with this, and in the summer you don't want to wear like one of those low back bustier type bras if you're trying to be all comfy and cool and garden in this thing, and then you have on one of those heavy bras. It's just working against you. So I'm going to line the top of this, and that would just give a little more security on top. It just takes about a yard of fabric, and it takes 8 yards of bias tape. So I'm going to show you real quick what the pattern looks like. So this is how this particular pattern goes together. They have little dots that line up on top of each other. So you look through your paper. The lighter weight the paper, the easier. You could also do this strictly with tracing off each piece with a tracing paper and not taping together the heavy paper like I'm doing the printer paper. But what I'm doing is once they're overlapped, and I don't know if you can see, but can you see there's 3 pieces right here the way they've this pattern maker's chosen to put these together. I'm taking a red pen and attaching my lines, or drawing the line that's underneath. It's a little hard to see, so you can see where they overlap, and I'm filling it in with red. I do that just so that it's easier for you to see. You can also see this is a hand-drawn pattern. I am going to trace this off with tracing paper, and when I do, I'm going to straighten up and true this up quite a bit, make it look a little less wavy. All right, this is how the pieces look all taped together. And now I'm going to trace them. You notice they're not named. There's no names for any of this. This is obviously the tie. I'm pretty sure this is the top of the bodice, and this is the waistline of the bodice. Don't know what that is. I'll have to look at the directions. They're not named. You don't know which is top and bottom, etc. So I'm going to look at the directions, and I'm going to label all of that when I trace this off, because this is really a cute little design, and I think I might make this more than once. So I have the pattern all pieced together, and I have gone back, and this is the original pattern. This is the same pattern, but I've traced it off, and I've trued up the lines a little bit. So I don't know if you can see. I'm going to just try and line this up. You can actually look through and see where I've just straightened things up and kind of neatened up the pattern a little bit. And then I've named everything, and I've named whether it's top or bottom. Now there are little notches which help, but for instance, this pattern piece is upside down, and this, they're opposite of each other. So here's our center front. This is the neckline gathering. This is the little armhole piece. This would be under the side. So I've just named everything where the gather marks are going to be, just to make it simpler to use when you're working on it, because that stuff is all missing on the pattern piece. So I've marked, undone all of that. This little piece, I had to go back and read. It's the stay, and what it is it lets you know how much to gather in this neckline. So that's what this little piece is. So anyway, so now we're ready to lay out and cut. I have a scrap. This is actually a scrap. It's actually a little less than a yard. It's missing its selvage. I've used it for something else. But if I'm cautious on how I lay this out, everything fits. So I'm going to lay out, I've got, you can see it's a long skinny piece the way I've laid it out. So here are my yoke and my bodice piece. Move this out of the way. Here's my long tie, and I just switched the direction. So these are on the lengthwise and this is on the crosswise. Because of the type of design on the fabric, it won't matter. But you need to pay attention to that. You don't want to have, if you're doing this, you know, with little flowers or mushrooms or something, and then suddenly your design goes from straight up and down to sideways. So you have to pay attention to that, and that's why I marked on here top and bottom, or where the waistline is and where the underbust is, because if you have a directional fabric, you could end up sewing this very easily upside down because there's no markings on the pattern piece. This little piece of white over here is actually left over from this, and it's just a plain piece of white, and I'm cutting out another of the bust line piece, this part, to make as the lining. I'm going to use a plain white, it's a satin. I bought hundreds of yards of satin bias tape a while back, so I have a huge reel of it, and so that's what I'm going to bias tape the whole thing with, and I'm going to line it with this white delicate sort of batiste. So I'm just going to cut out really quickly, and we'll be ready to head over to the sewing machine and sew. All right, we're ready to sew. When you print out your pattern, this is your pattern cover, and then it has this page which shows how you tape it together, and it actually tapes together. This is blank. There is no sheet of paper right here, so it's taped together in sort of a little L shape. Then we're ready to start sewing. Now the stay is not a piece that you cut out. The stay is strictly there to get the length right. So we're cutting out the other pieces, but not the little piece that's the stay, which is this one. This one you don't need to cut out of fabric, this little piece, but we do need it. I'm lining mine, so I'm taking the two top little bust line pieces, one that I cut out of a lining and the one that I cut out of my regular fabric, and I'm going to give them a good press. See this? That's the underarm. So this is neckline. You can see this would shape under the bust. This goes under the arm. And all I'm doing is I have one cut out of lining and one cut out of regular, and I'm going to treat them as one piece. So I'm going to lay one on top of the other, and we're going to gather. Now there are markings, there are little notches on your pattern. You do want to transfer those because that helps line everything up, and it also helps you know where to gather. And I want to gather my two pieces together. We're going to gather between the notches. If you look at the directions, if we look at our directions, it's a little hard to see, but down here you can see where they are gathering, and they're gathering up between the notches. So I'm going to run my basting lines along my neck edge. I'm going to go ahead, because we also gather down here and there's little notches on that. I'm also going to go ahead and do the under bust gathering. So I'm going to run all of those gathering lines since I'm going to be basting anyway. This is at 5/8 inch seam allowance. So when doing your basting is usually a 4, depending on how your machine's numbers are. Most of them are set up like this. So you want a 4 or longer if you have it. Mine will go a lot longer. So I do 4, 4.5 for my gathering lines. So we're going to run 2 rows, one right around the 5/8 inch and then one a little narrower at 3/8 or 1/4 inch, and that just gives an easier, better gather. So I'm going to run both of those, and then I'll show you how to measure it with the stay, and then we'll do our first row of bias tape. All right, so this is the gathering lines. I haven't gathered anything up yet. And of course I lined the back just to give it a little bit more stability and security, especially if you're working with a lightweight fabric. If you're doing this in like a pink gingham check, for sure, line the back so you don't have any shadow through. All right, so now that we're done that, we are going to get out our stay piece. Okay, we're going to take our little stay piece and our bodice, and we're going to pull on this upper edge here our gathering lines. Now you do not have gathering lines in this little section right here on each end of our neckline. So we're going to, and I've marked my center front. That's just so I make sure and get my gathers even right and left. I don't want them all kind of squished to one side. So I'm just going to gather up using this, and what will happen is it will come together, so we'll have a, and then I will just bias tape this whole thing. Now, my bias tape folds over to 1/4 inch, but this has 5/8 inch seam allowance. So you're either going to make it deeper and not use your whole 5/8, which is what I'm going to do because I need more length. This is sort of a shallow bust line, like I don't want it too low. It depends on how busty you are. If you're kind of smaller in the bust line, you may want to lose a little more and go ahead and go at the 5/8 inch line and trim away. Either way, I'm going to go ahead and gather this up, switching from basting back to a shorter stitch. All right, so this is the gathering lines. I haven't gathered anything up yet. And of course, I lined the back just to give it a little bit more stability and security, especially if you're working with a lightweight fabric. If you're doing this in like a pinky gingham check, for sure, line the back so you don't have any shadow through. All right, so now that we're done that, we are going to get out our stay piece. All right, so I've got my gather stitches in and I've started gathering. Here is my neckline stay, and the gathering matches up with the stay from these little notches. So they gave us notches. I actually put a little piece of tiny bit of red on there just to make it a little easier for Yoke to see. And so we're going to gather from there to there, and that's also how long it's supposed to be according to the stay. So I'm just going to even out these gathers, and then I'm going to grab my bias. Okay, so when you go to add your bias, here's my bias tape. We're going to open it up, and we're going to pin it along this edge. Now, if I pin along this edge, I'm only taking off a 1/4 inch, but it's given us 5/8 inch seam allowance. So if that's going to make this neckline too high, make sure you bring your bias down to the 5/8 inch line. So that would be all the way down here. We'll stitch right in this little fold all the way across, and then you're going to trim away this excess. I'm going to go ahead and do it up here because I need a little extra length, bigger bust cup. So it really depends on your cup. If you're an A cup, a B cup, you want to come down to 5/8. If you're more of a C or a D, you might want to come up a little higher to give yourself a little fullness. Okay, here's our little neckline pinned. And this is what it looks like on the back side since I've lined it, trying to keep my little gathers nice and even. And now I'm just going to go ahead and stitch along this shorter line. Let me show you the directions. We've gathered to our stay, and then it says bind with your binding. So that's what we're going to do. It doesn't really show it, but it tells us. So we're going to do that. I like these little old directions. Aren't they cute? Look, they look like they were typed on a typewriter. Oh my gosh, adorable. All right, this is how it looks when I'm sewing. I've got my 1/4 inch foot, but you just need a straight stitch or zigzag foot. I'm straight stitching this on. You can see I'm stitching in the ditch on this. Watching my pleats, I really pinned everything well. I quickly trimmed a little bit of the excess. I didn't want any black showing beyond my selvage edge here because it really showed through because I'm using a white bias. So when that flips around, see, it's nice and pretty. So we're going to flip this to the back. The back should be just a tiny bit longer than the front so that when you're stitching, you catch both layers. So you're going to have to really watch that you don't end up only catching, that this doesn't flip back up on you because you missed catching that back layer. So we're going to pin that down and stitch it in. Part 2 of the bias tape. This is how it looks on the back. This is how it looks on the front. And you can see this is where my needle, so I am just stitching on the inside of this. Depending on your bias tape, how thick it is. Now I'm using a satin. If you're using a cotton, you may be able to stitch in the ditch right next to it, right here. That may be an option for you. But for me, I feel safest stitching right along the edge like this. And then I know for sure I'm catching everything and I won't have an issue. All right, now that we have our pretty little bias on that end, we're going to take our little midriff yoke part here. And it has, again, it has our little notches. So let's make sure we transfer those. I'm going to mark them in red. And I'm marking only in the seam allowance. So now that we have our little yoke piece, we are going to attach this to this, right sides together. We're going to start at the center front here. And we're going to have to make a little clip to make it turn, but we're going to get the pin first. So we're going to pin that end, and then I'm going to come all the way over here and pin this other end so you can see how we're doing this. And you can see where the gathers start, and that is right in line with our notch. So there's no gathers this far over because that's starting to get into the underarm area. So all of this is going to get gathered in this area. And again, there's a little spot here where there's no gathers. So we're going to pin that. And then we're going to pull up our gathers, and I'm going to straight stitch this first, and then I'm going to come back and serge it to seam finish. The other thing you could do is go ahead and bias bind that if you want everything bias bound. That would be another really nice way to finish all of these seam allowances. So now that I've done this, I can pull my strings and start getting those gathers lined up. It's a little stiffer because I have 2 layers, but you can see how that starts pulling in to line up. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for this whole under bust, and we'll stitch it in. All right, I just want you to see this is the gathers for under the bust, and they're pinned in to the yoke. So that's what we're going to sew. I'm going to just sew a 5/8 inch. I've only got half of it in up to here, and then we're going to make a little clip right here so this opens up nicely and will separate good for going over, because we've got sort of that convex concave curve thing. We've got an innie point and an outie point that we've got to make happy with each other. So right here we're going to do a little clip. Depending on your fabric, you may want to go ahead and do a little basting or a little stitching right where you're going to clip so that it doesn't fray past. I'm not going to clip too deep. I'm going to be kind of careful. I'm actually going to wait to even clip it till I'm ready to sew. Be cautious of that because it could easily fray out and then fray out right in the front of your top at the bust line. If you've never sewn a garment that has that kind of V in it where you're attaching 2 different shapes, you know, together, here's my little clip. It's really good to sink your needle at that spot and rotate instead of trying to go straight across and then they can kind of fall away. It actually will make your life easier if you sink your needle and then get ready to rotate and stitch down. I've already kind of basted this a little bit, but that helps keep everything straight. You can see right at the needle there's no wrinkles. There's wrinkles before and after it, but not right at the needle. We can keep it right on our 5/8 inch line and stitch this in, and it will sew in just right. And then we'll have a nice little V in the front. It won't do a good job though if you don't do a little tiny clip there too. That really makes a difference. Look at how cute it's already looking. I just took out my basting stitches. I've serged it. And now we're going to come down here. I'm going to show you your directions. So we've done this. Now we're going to come back and do this. Now on one side, we're just sewing it. You can serge those edges together, but on the other side, you need to leave a little opening. So what I'm choosing to do is for all of these, I'm going to go ahead and serge my side seams over here, and then I'm going to open this up and serge this on each side seam too, and then just do a regular straight stitch 5/8 inch. That's going to be the easiest way to do this, to press this open and have that little hole. And then we just are going to start right up here and we're going to bias all the way around and it's done. So let's serge and do our little side seams. On your directions it says leave open 2 inches for slot, but our pattern has notches on it to show us where the slot goes. So I have pinned where those notches are, and it's larger than 3 inches if you follow the notches. It is like 3.5 inches. So go ahead and sew it according to the notches, and you can see if you think that's just too open for you, but it's to allow for this to slide through, so it kind of makes sense. So you may want to tighten it up, but all I'm going to do is start up here, straight stitch, do a little back stitch, lift up, back stitch, straight stitch down. And so this is open, but we've got our 5/8 inch above and below, and we'll press that whole thing open. The other side, we'll just straight stitch it down. No hole needed. Okay, I'm just going to show you how this little slit looks from the outside. Got threads here. There we go. So this is how it looks. There's the opening. This is how it looks on the inside. And the other seam is pressed. And now we're just going to come right here with our bias, and we want to have a nice long tail. So here's our tail. We're folding this in half, and we're going to just straight stitch this tail together. This is what's going to tie around the neck for the halter part. And then we're sandwiching this, and we're just going to top stitch this around. And I have this pressed open. We're just going to pin and follow all the way around with our bias. Because it's bias, it will turn this corner. Just take your time. But anyway, that's it. We're just going to, that one strip of bias is going to go all the way around, back up, and across here. So one long sewing session of attaching bias like this all the way around. And I am gonna go ahead and pin it on, at least get it started to help me. Mine is a flat bias, flat single fold. You may have a double fold. Here's another flat single fold. So a double fold is pressed already for you like this in half. Mine is not. It works either way. It's gonna work the same. It might be easier for you if you buy it already pressed. It just might make it a little easier for you to work with. Okay, I'm just top stitching bias on its own right now as I'm leading up to here. And I made it extra long just to make it easy for tying around the neck. I can always shorten it. When I figure out how long I want it, I will tie a knot and probably stitch that knot down, and that will be my end. I'll probably use a little freight check or something on that too. So here's my string. This is the neckline. This is what's going to come around the neck, the halter part. And you can see I just crossed my seam right here where the hole is. And this is what it looks like on the back side. And we're just gonna keep going around. The main thing with this is just making sure you catch both sides of your bias. You want the short side, if yours is pre-pressed, short side of bias always goes on top, the longer side goes on the back. Look at how cute this style is. Now this is a little large for my dress form, so I just want to make sure you are aware when you're looking at this. You can see there's a lot of fullness. This is a very tiny dress form, and I made a medium, which I think is for like a 34, 36 bust, and normally that would be a fuller hip and waist than this dress form has too. So it's a little bit big as far as the body goes, but it's super cute. Pull through like this to tie, but so there's the back tied, there's the front, still fits nicely. Not very hard, not very time consuming. The biggest issue you have to make is when you're putting the ties on at the side seam that you get them on correctly. If you get them upside down, it's going to really fit wonky at the side seam and it's not going to wrap nicely. So just make sure that you get those going the right direction. It has notches and everything to help with that. It's really not that hard though. If you want a fun little summery vintage look, this is it. Be really cute in a bandana fabric too. See you next week for another fun video.